As a lawyer, what is the craziest case you've had? Back in my greener days as a criminal defense attorney, I acquired a female client that beats them all. Jessica was classic northern New England, mid-20s, a bit unkempt, train wreck of crooked teeth, somewhat attractive, slightly naive. She wouldn't get an invitation to All Saints' Day. Had a history of prior legal scrapes. Mostly minor. Still, Jessica's charge sheet was a mile long. Multiple serious felonies, aggravated assaults, with an automobile, felony mischief, destruction of property, felony hit and runs, leaving the scene of an accident, negligent operation, evading police, etc. I thought that the state would get tired of listing charges against her and restrain themselves. But no. This information to the court was the longest I had ever seen. Then and since. The event in question allegedly took place at the Long Trail Inn. It's not an inn. The inn is short for infamous sad, decrepit watering hole. The Long Trail was notorious. Now, it's a given that all my clients are innocent. But my heart sank as I reviewed the affidavits and witness statements. Everything aligned against Jessica. I remember thinking, really? My client's screwed. I didn't feel any better after testing the state's attorney to see if an early resolution was possible. Spittle formed in the corner of his lips as he assured me, your client will leave prison when hell freezes over. Short discussion. It was. I thought she'd be lucky to enjoy her golden years breathing free air. But the old saw is true, every story has two sides. And boy oh boy did Jessica have a story. It was altogether a different order of magnitude than the state's version. I dove headfirst into the case. After a lot of witness interviews, discovery, depositions, and motion practice, the picture pieced together. As the trial loomed, we had a final status conference before the jury draw. The judge reviewed the file on the bench, put the file down, rubbed his eyes, sniffed, picked up the file, and looked increasingly confused. Would you tell me what this case is really about? The judge asked the state's attorney. The state presented its allegations in terse, sharp, sound bites, not inaccurate so much as incomplete. I raised my hand. Your Honor, I'd like to respond. And I told the court the following story about Jessica's case, with some additional details included here that I thought it wiser to not share at the time with the court. Jessica and her fiancé broke up the month before. Turned out he had been two-timing on Jessica with a side girl, who was Jessica's friend, and planned to marry her. The lying jerk. The bride was no prize, either. Meanwhile, Jessica, still blue from losing her boyfriend and best friend in one clean swoop, wanted to get out of the house for Saturday night cheer. She picked up a friend and went to the Long Trail. Once there, what do you know? The parking lot was packed. Cars everywhere. On the grass. Flowing onto the side of the state highway. Jam-packed. Huh? Says Jessica. Wonder what's going on? She slowly rolled past the door to get a look inside. See if she could recognize anybody. The bar was draped with ribbons and balloons. What the? Two and two slowly came together. A wedding was going on. Then she recognized people inside. In dawning horror, she realized that this was her ex's wedding reception. At the Long Trail Inn, of all places. Who does that? Whatever, it was time to leave. At exactly the same moment a ghost materialized out of the dark fields. It swerved into the light and was none other than the bride herself, still dressed in her bridal gown. Stumbling heels, wiping white powder off her nose. The courtroom tittered behind me. Now, there was no love lost between Jessica and the bride. Literally without warning, the bride muttered vaguely unhappy threats, rushed the car, ripped open the door, unlatched Jessica's seat belt, dragged her out of the car by the hair, and started swinging fists into her. Jessica was having none of it. She gripped at anything available on her assailant. Wedding gown, tightly frizzed hair, corset, bra strap. A full-on brawl followed. The courtroom openly laughed now. About this time, the bartender leaned forward to look out the door. She saw the bride and Jessica rolling around in a dirt ball, bridal gown ripping apart, grappling for purchase, trading blows. Hey, there's a fight in the parking lot. Looks like the bride. In one continuous motion, the entire contents of the bar tipped towards the exit, where they jammed up in the doorframe for a beat. Seeing trouble headed their way, Jessica's friend in the passenger seat screamed at Jessica to get in the car. Jessica looked up in time to see the advancing problem, got free of the bride, and dove into the car. Locked the door this time. A drunken angry mob surrounded her car, pried at the door handles, screamed at the windows, pounded on the glass. Jessica panicked, leaned on the horn, and put the car in gear. Mayhem ensued. Inebriated rednecks flew off the hood right and left. But in her panic, she drove into the dead end of the parking lot, surrounded by cars. Now what? Reversing direction, she clipped and creased a half-dozen cars, matted the pedal, swerved to avoid as many people as possible, and hit more cars while trying to make the turn. Jessica's car got hung up on a car's bumper. She reversed to get free, rear-ended more cars, finally got free, and headed out of the parking lot at high speed, spraying gravel and people everywhere. Law enforcement arrived promptly at the scene. A be on the lookout was issued for Jessica. A drunken mob at the bar smelled blood. Word was out all over Lamoille County that the hunt was on. Needless to say, Jessica was freaked out. She kept out of sight for the balance of the night, and turned herself into the local PD the next morning. When she figured the temperature had cooled a bit, I was assigned to Jessica's defense after all the PDS conflicted out due to the lengthy witness list consisting of prior criminals. In some cases, it was. In short, Jessica had acted in self-defense. It was a necessary defense of the charges against her, but for the bride initiating the fight, but for the angry mob heading out the door to escalate the situation. None of this would have happened. Seeing their case deflate like a failed souffle, the state valiantly argued that my client remained criminally culpable because she knew, or should have known, that her ex was having his wedding reception at the Long Trail that night. This was not a good night for her to get a drink there. Proof? I asked the court and state's attorney. The reception location wasn't advertised. The signage at the Long Trail didn't say otherwise. And strangely, my client wasn't invited to this highbrow event. Crickets. The state eventually offered to settle the case with a plea to a disorderly conduct charge, the most minor infraction available. Long story about how we finally got there. In my client's best interest, I decided against reminding the state's attorney of his famous earlier words. Better to not rub salt into the wound. For the time. Now, pleading guilty to anything on these facts rankled my sense of fairness. But Jessica freely shared information with me that presented risks to certain aspects of her trial because the defense of her case nearly mandated her own testimony. Legal issues and practical issues. A raft of felonies against my client backed by the testimony of multiple, injured, and PO'd state witnesses. Tearing them apart on the witness stand would have been entertaining. But the bottom line is that trials are risky. From that perspective, the plea deal was vastly superior to chancing a jury verdict at trial. We agreed to the plea, on the understanding that the state would investigate the bride for assault. 5 months later the bride pled to a charge of simple assault against my client. Hell did not freeze over.